William Shakespeare's Plays, Part 2. While it is difficult to determine the exact chronology of Shakespeare's plays, over the course of 2 decades, from about 1590 to 1613, he wrote a total of 37 plays revolving around several main themes: histories, tragedies, comedies, and tragicomedies. Shakespeare's Plays and the First Folio. The First Folio was the first publication of a collection of Shakespeare's works, put together 7 years after his death. It contained 36 Shakespeare plays set out in three categories of comedies, histories, and tragedies, a categorization that still underpins the practice of Shakespeare criticism, education, and performance today. As well as these three Shakespeare plays types of comedy, history, and tragedy, subsequent academics and Shakespeare aficionados have also categorized Shakespeare's plays into Roman plays, Last plays, Lost plays, Masque plays, Problem plays, Romance plays, and Tragicomedy plays. Early works, histories, and comedies. With the exception of the tragic love story Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare's first plays were mostly histories. Henry VI, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, Henry II, and Henry V dramatized the destructive results of weak or corrupt rulers and have been interpreted by drama historians as Shakespeare's way of justifying the origins of Tudor dynasty. Julius Caesar portrays upheaval in Roman politics that have resonated with the viewers at that time when England's aging monarch, Queen Elizabeth I, had no legitimate heir, thus creating the potential for future power struggles. Shakespeare also wrote several comedies during his early period: the whimsical A Midsummer's Night Dream, the romantic Merchant of Venice, the wit and wordplay of Much Ado About Nothing, and the charming As You Like It and Twelfth Night. Other plays written before 1600 include Titus Andronicus, the Comedy of Errors, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Taming of the Shrew, Love's Labour's Last, King John, The Merry Wives of Windsor, and Henry V. Works after 1600. Tragedies and Tragicomedies. It was in Shakespeare's later period, after 1600, that he wrote the tragedies, popular tragedies: Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. In these, Shakespeare's characters present vivid impressions of human temperament that are timeless and universal. Possibly the best known of these plays is Hamlet, which explores betrayal, retribution, incest, and moral failure. These moral failures often drive the twists and turns of Shakespeare's plots, destroying the hero and those he loves. In Shakespeare's final period, he wrote several tragicomedies. Among these are The Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest. Though graver in tone than the comedies, they are not the dark tragedies of King Lear or Macbeth, because they end with reconciliation and forgiveness. That is the difference between the major tragedies and the tragic comedies that he wrote towards the end of his career. Other plays written during this particular period include All Is Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, Timon of Athens, Coriolanus, Pericles, and Henry VIII. There are a few lost plays of Shakespeare. I mean the plays that are lost, L-O-S-T, by virtue of the kind of account that is given by the scholars. Very little is known of Shakespeare's last plays, and this list should likely be much longer, but sadly the below you may find one or two plays. A few to be mentioned here is Cordenio is one of the plays that is lost, and Love's Labor 1 is also a last play. And you can see the kind of link that is given as open source Shakespeare. If you click, you will get lots of information about Shakespeare's plays, his personal life, his criticism, his influence and sources, etc. Now, Shakespeare's comedy. What are the characteristics of Shakespeare's comedy, and who these plays are meant to? All this information you will find in this slide. While there may be some funny moments, the Shakespearean comedy may involve some very dramatic story lines. Usually, what defines a Shakespearean play as a comedy is that it has a happy ending, often involving a marriage. The main characteristics in Shakespeare's comedies are there is usually a struggle of young lovers to overcome problems, often the result of the interference of their elders. There is some element of separation and reunification, mistaken identities, often involving disguise. That is what you find in As You Like It, as well as in Merchant of Venice. A clever servant also is present in the play comedies. Family tensions that are usually resolved at the end, complex and interwoven plot lines, frequent use of puns and other styles of comedy. The Shakespearean plays which are usually classified as comedy are The Merchant of Venice, Twelfth Night, All is Well That Ends Well, The Tempest, Taming of the Shrew, The Winter's Tale, As You Like It, The Comedy of Errors, Love's Labour's Lost, A Midsummer's Night Dream, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Merry Wives of Windsor, Measure for Measure, Much Ado About Nothing, Pericles, Prince of Tyre, and The Two Noble King's Men. Shakespeare's tragedy. Tragedies may involve comedic moments also, but tend towards more serious and dramatic plots with an ending that involves the death of main characters. The main features of Shakespeare's tragedy are that characters become isolated or there is a social breakdown. The tragedy ends in death. There is a sense that events are inevitable and inescapable. There is usually a central figure who is noble but with a character flaw which leads to the downfall. The plays which are generally classified as Shakespearean tragedies are Macbeth, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Titus Andronicus, Julius Caesar, Troilus and Cressida, Othello, Coriolanus, King Lear, Antony and Cleopatra, Timon of Athens, and Cymbeline. And this is much debated whether Cymbeline is a tragedy or a tragic comedy and so on, but then it is also included here. Shakespeare's histories. Let us not say Shakespeare's historical plays. Shakespeare's history plays. It is known as history plays. Shakespeare's histories focus on English monarchs. They usually play upon Elizabethan propaganda, showing the dangers of civil war, glorifying the Queen's Tudor ancestors. The depictions of monarchs, including Richard III, an enemy of the Tudors, and Henry V, one of the great Tudor monarchs, have been influential in creating a perception of these kings which has persisted throughout the centuries. Many historians point to inaccuracies in the depictions, but the plays have been very popular in presenting a particular image which it is hard for many of us to see the past. In that way, I think Shakespeare is great. The histories are King John, Richard II, Henry the Fourth, Part 1, Part 2, Henry the Fifth, Henry the Sixth, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Richard the Third, and Henry the Eighth. There are additional Shakespeare plays categories. They are categorized in an additional groups also, as I said in the beginning. The original classification, of course, all of us know: comedies, tragedies, histories, and early comedies. And in addition to these, the scholars have also divided further divisions like a problem plays, romance plays, rom- masque plays, and many other classifications like Roman plays, problem plays. Okay. Now let us first talk about Shakespeare's Roman plays. The category of Shakespeare's Roman plays is simply a convenient description that scholars and critics have given to four plays that Shakespeare set in ancient Rome. Although Shakespeare experts don't always agree on this. Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus, Julius Caesar, and Titus Andronicus. Shakespeare's masked plays. There are few plays that are known as masked plays because of their the inclusion of music, dance, and songs, and acting out of the story, a play within a play, etc. It was very popular during England, in England during the 16th century and 17th centuries. Therefore, Shakespeare had to include the mask elements. The plays that are classified as mask plays are Henry VIII, A Midsummer's Night Dream, Romeo and Juliet, and Tempest. Shakespeare's romance plays. Shakespeare's later plays had elements of comedy and tragedy, as well as having a wider view of life. They have become a new classification named romance plays. They are sometimes called tragic comedies also, but mostly they are called romance. They are Pericles, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest. Shakespeare's tragic comedies. There's also another classification. A tragic comedy is a play that is neither a comedy nor a tragedy, although it has the features of both. While plays that fall between these two stools of tragedy and comedy are generally referred to as Shakespeare's tragedies. They are sometimes referred to as Roman plays also. Okay, there are a lot of classifications, and then you may understand this as a tragic comedies. Cymbeline, for example, started with the tragic elements and then ends with the comic comedy. Merchant of Venice, of course, starts with the tragic element and ends in happy ending. Winter's Tales also is a similar one. Then what is known as a problem plays? Shakespeare's problem plays. There are no problems about these plays, but a problem, a particular problem is discussed in the particular play. That is why it is known as problem plays. Whatever the reasons about 1599 to 1600, Shakespeare turned with unsparing intensity to the exploration of darker issues such as revenge, sexual jealousy, aging, mild life crisis, and death. Perhaps he saw that his own life was moving into a newer phase of more complex and vexing experiences. That is the reason why he had worked through the romantic comedy and history plays and the emotional trajectories of maturation that they encompassed. Now, the problem play is a form of drama that emerged during the 19th century as part of the wider movement of realism in the arts. It is only the name that was popular in 19th century, and classifying some of the plays of Shakespeare, they have given the name problem plays. There are three plays that could be classified as problem plays. One is All is Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, and Troilus and Cressida. All is Well and that ends well is a comedy ending in acceptance of marriage, but in a way that poses thorny ethical issues. Count Bertram, for example, cannot initially accept his marriage to Helena, a woman of lower social station, who has grown up in his noble household and has won Bertram as her husband by her seemingly miraculous cure of the French king. Bertram's reluctance to face the responsibilities of marriage is all the more dismaying when he turns his amorous intentions to a Florentine maiden Diana, whom he wishes to seduce without marriage. Helena's strategy to resolve this difficulty is the so-called bed trick, substituting herself in Bertram's bed for the arranged assignation and then calling her wayward husband into account when she is pregnant with his child. Her ends are achieved by such morally ambiguous means that the marriage seems at best a precocious institution on which to base the presumed reassurance of romantic comedy. The pathway toward resolution and emotional maturity is not easy. Helena is more ambitious heroine than Rosalind and Viola. The problem of marriage is being discussed. The ethical issue of marriage is being discussed. Whether Bertram is, liable to be faithful to her, his wife. That is the problem that is being discussed here, and that is why it is called problem place. Okay. The